And guys, we mentioned when looking at the free agents upcoming for the Indianapolis Colts, we mentioned that we're going to be doing more of a deep dive into some of these players individually. And so we're going to start with, I think, the guy, Derek, that out of all these players, probably the player that we are the most adamant that the Indianapolis Colts probably should go back. It's probably the most high profile player out of all of them. And there are a lot of high profile players, but probably the most prolific, high profile player out there, Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. Derek, talk to me about Michael Pittman, what he did in 2023, and kind of your thoughts on him and what he means to this Colts team.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about being a Indianapolis Colt, Michael Pittman is the literal definition of that. So when it comes to Michael Pittman, he is a grinder. He is a guy that does all the dirty work, consistent, always reliable, and a guy that just doesn't really complain about a lot of different things. Just goes out there and does his job. And I don't think there's much more you can really say about that when it comes to Michael Pittman. I mean, clearly he has an effect on the guys in the locker room. He is that most likely seems like the guy that isn't much of the talker. He's more of the guy that just goes out there and does the work and shows leadership through his actions, which is being out there, doing all the little things and just being that guy. When we talk about being a Colt, I think Michael Pittman's also the very prototypical version of that, especially for the wide receivers that we talk about, Cody, because it's no doubt that if you want to be an Indianapolis Colt wide receiver, you have to be willing to block, especially if you want to play on first and second downs. And, we have two of those guys in Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman. That's why not every wide receiver that ever gets to play on any roster gets to be an Indianapolis Colt, because the reason why we run the football so well. And a lot of it has to do with guys like Michael Pittman who perform at blocking, doing things that wide receivers don't get talked about enough for in today's game. So overall, just a great figure for the locker room and just the type of guy that you definitely want to have on your organization.
Yeah, and he's been a guy that's really never complained. I know he said, he wants more targets, but that's really been the only time that we've heard Michael Pittman Jr. over his career really say much to the media or really say anything publicly. Like, he's such a down-to-earth guy, such a hard worker, like we mentioned. And Derek, all the quarterbacks that he's played with since his rookie season in 2020. I mean, you got Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, the trio of quarterbacks last year. And then this year, the combination of Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew. And you look at what he did, Derek, he's, the last 3 years, he's been right around or above that 1,000-yard mark. He's been a guy that's been 100 catch guy, over 1,000 yards typically. And he's just coming off of his career year with the Indianapolis Colts, a season where he missed a game and a half, but still finished with 109 catches for 1,152 yards and 4 touchdowns. And so, one of his best seasons, his breakout season for the Indianapolis Colts. And I think, Derek, that's exactly what you're looking for because, while 2022 wasn't like a bad year for Michael Pittman Jr., you wanted a little bit more. And it wasn't Michael Pittman Jr.'s fault necessarily for why he wasn't getting shots down the field. I mean, you look at it, Derek, the difference for Michael Pittman Jr., from 2022 to 2023, it's crazy. He averaged over a yard less per reception last year, but he still caught, 99 passes. And so it's crazy to see the difference a year makes, this difference a play caller makes, even a quarterback makes, from where he is now. But he's just been a consistent guy like he talked about. He has been a Colt through and through. He's a hard worker. He's a tough player. And he doesn't complain either. And so I think he's just a guy that is such a great role model for your wide receiver core, extremely young wide receiver core. And you think if you're going to add another guy in there, just continuing to set that culture for what it means to be an Indianapolis Colt, what it means to play wide receiver for them. I think for all those things, Derek, and for all the things he's had to persevere through, with really not having a great quarterback really ever to throw the football to him, I think that warrants him, having and earning, that contract that he is due here.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt that the quarterback play has never been consistent here in Indianapolis ever since Andrew Luck has left. And but there has been one thing that has been consistent, and that is Michael Pittman consistently showing up and making plays. His rookie year with Phillip Rivers at the end of the year was really starting to hit stride. And then that second year with Carson Wentz, you saw even early in the year, midway through the year, I mean, Michael Pittman was out there mossing everyone. That was his probably his best statistical year if you actually want to go back and look at the numbers from a receiving yard slash touchdowns sake. But yeah, he was there. He was the only wide receiver threat you had. And then last year, we can't really say much about last year because the offense in general for the Indianapolis Colts was just abysmal. There's nothing more to say than that. They had a terrible quarterback with a terrible offensive line and a terrible coaching staff and a terrible everything going on the offensive side. So I can't really haunt that much on Michael Pittman because nobody stepped up. But then when you look at this year, once again, we found out that Michael Pittman was not only the number one, but he was the number one by a long shot. I mean, he was clearly by far and away the best guy that you had out there. And most of the game plans revolved around him. So it's no doubt. I mean, when you have your best guy and you don't have necessarily a plan to go after him for that, or you don't have a plan to replace him, then there's no reason to not bring back the guy that is clearly your number one on your offense. And you need to be able to handle that. Now, the big question is, Cody, how much is it going to cost to actually keep him around?
Yeah. For sure. And it's not like he's not putting up these 1,500-yard, multi-touchdown seasons. But, again, you do wonder, Derek, if you have Anthony Richardson fully healthy, what could it look like for Michael Pittman to have a quarterback that actually will, throw the ball down the field to him? Because we've seen in the past, like you mentioned, 2021, he can actually do that. But for whatever reason, it feels like the last couple of years, the Colts have gone away from getting Pittman involved down the field a little bit more than we thought he would early on. So I'm excited to see kind of what that element brings. And just, also just with the touchdowns, like he only had 4 touchdowns this year. But you got to wonder, man, how many more opportunities will he get in things like the red zone and different opportunities with the type of quarterback and Shane Steichen, obviously, in your number 2, feeling more comfortable now getting Michael Pittman the football and letting him kind of out-jump some guys because we've seen he can do that when called upon. But you're right. When it comes to the contract, that is the biggest question mark. We'll see on that. I feel like Pittman's done a great job of kind of just letting it play out, letting his play speak for itself, and letting everything else kind of fall into play. And I know for some people, they look at that, for what the numbers might potentially be, 22, 24, 25 million, whatever it is. And they're kind of like, I don't know about that. But Derek, I think you can make a strong case, like you mentioned. Like Pittman has not only been the number one receiver, but it really hasn't been close, really, outside of his rookie season. He's been far and away the best receiver on this team. I mean, his year one, okay, yeah, he got a little bit injured. The Colts had T.Y. Hilton. There was things like that. But other than that, Derek, I mean, I think this year in 2023 was probably the guy that was the closest. Josh Downs, who had, 771 receiving yards. But still, we saw, Derek, in that Atlanta Falcons game, how critical it was and how big of a blow it was to the Colts offense to not have Michael Pittman in that game. So I think if you're his agent, you look at that, you say, my guy is essential to your offense thriving. He is. I mean, he really is. He's been essential, and he continues to be essential. It doesn't matter who the coach is. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. He's the number one guy. So I think from that standpoint, like you take a little bit of a risk and maybe overpay, quote unquote, but you take the risk thinking he had a great season and he, with essentially a backup quarterback, like what could he do more? And what else could he unlock with Anthony Richardson? So I think you take that risk. And Derek, also you look at that, you have $72 million and, you're not going to find a number one receiver really out there that's his age and his production. So for all those reasons, I think maybe for some people you overpay. And I think that's a totally valid thing to do because he's been that valuable, I think, to your franchise and to your passing game in general. So that's kind of what my thoughts are on kind of paying him the amount that some people maybe aren't as comfortable with.
Well, I mean, the highest paid going into the contract numbers just a little bit here. Mike Evans is the highest paid free agent from this last year, Cody, and he's sitting at 16.5 million an average. And that puts him, I think, just outside of the top 15 wide receivers in the league. We talk about Christian Kirk. He was getting 18 million a year on average. The franchise tag total is running around just under 20 million. And there are basically about 5 wide receivers right now that are getting paid at around that $20 million a year mark. That is Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen. Those are and DJ Moore. So those are definitely some guys that I think you could see right at around where that number should be. And not to mention, I mean, Michael Pittman is also younger than all of those guys, right? So he's younger and he hasn't even hit his peak yet. So, I mean, it would not shock me if the number is that he's looking for is around that 22 to 23 million dollar range, because when you start looking at who's at 20.6, that's DJ Moore. And then the next highest is Terry McLaurin at 23 million. So I would say 21, 22, maybe even at the 23 mark, you start wondering where we're starting to go with this one. But where do you think the number is for you to where you would cut off for Michael Pittman and just say cut your losses and just not bring him back? Is there a cutoff?
I mean, I think if he's pushing like 26 million or something like that, like I'm kind of like, okay, that's a little crazy. But again, he does have leverage in the fact that nobody on this team has even scratched what he's done. But also, yeah, if he's demanding like top 3 wide receiver money, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's worth it to me, even though I think he's a great player. You can go find another wide receiver for that amount of money. You can go pay T. Higgins the amount of money, who obviously doesn't have quite the production, but he's still a young player. It was taken, I believe, the pick before Pittman in that 2020 draft. So,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be the cutoff for me. But again, he's been so valuable to this offense. It would be very difficult for me to see the Colts walking away from that.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure that Pittman will be insanely greedy with that. Again, when you start getting towards 24 million, you start talking about guys like Deebo Samuel. You start talking about guys like DK Metcalf. You start talking about guys like Stephon Diggs and AJ Brown. When you start talking top 7 or 8 contracts of all wide receivers, yeah, I don't think Michael Pittman's quite going to hit that, but it would not shock me if that number hits over 20 million, because again, guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are making that. And I mean, if Michael Pittman can't get it, then I don't know what else we're doing here. So that will definitely be interesting. I can't even really think of a con, Cody, to not wanting to re-sign Michael Pittman, because like you said, the only con would be is if you're right, if Michael Pittman starts asking for $24+ million over the top of that, then I just don't see a scenario in which you do that. But I don't also see a situation where Michael Pittman does do that. It's kind of at that point for us. So, I mean, outside of it, I really don't see a scenario in which you don't have Michael Pittman come back. And that's the big question. Do you think that the Colts are going to franchise tag him? I mean, obviously, this is all potential. We're guessing.
Yeah.
But do you think this ends up being a situation where Ballard ends up using the tag and then says, hey, let's kind of discuss a long-term contract more while you play under the tag?
I think, yeah, it does depend how much. Again, how far apart are they? If they're extremely far apart, Ballard, I think we'll tag him and be like, okay, we'll figure this out later. We'll continue this conversation, but like you're critical to us, and so we want to keep you. We just got to figure out what that looks like. But if Pittman and his agent are pretty like reasonable, and Ballard even said it in his end of the year presser, he doesn't want to do it, but it's a tool, and so. They'll use it if they have to, but I think they'd rather work on a long-term deal and get that finalized. And that would make sense to me. But I think it's like a kind of a last, sort of thing. If they cannot figure out, a kind of a common ground there, I think that's when we probably would see them, go for the franchise tag. But I do think they'll figure something out. But I guess it is there for a reason. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I don't really see a situation where it will happen, but again, you never know. This is the NFL. The NFL is a cutthroat business, so we'll see how it goes. But of all the guys that we're going to talk about through this series, Cody, of talking of like the big name free agents, we can kind of end it with this one. Like, where do you rank Michael Pittman on the priority list to re-sign if you're the Indianapolis Colts? Is he at the bottom? Is he at the top? What do you think?
I think for a couple reasons. Number one, I think consistency. Number two, durability. And number three, I think just how essential he is to this team. I would say he's number one for me, Derek, because he's not really been a guy that's necessarily like had a poor year. Last year, for him, a poor year, but like it wasn't a poor year, overall. So I think for all those reasons and what we saw when he left or when he was injured, I think he's number one priority for me. You bring him back, you make it happen because of all those reasons and because how much he means to your team. I think Michael Pittman, there's no question in my mind. You bring him back, and he's your first priority to get done.
Yeah, I definitely think he should be the number one priority to bring back. I mean, we talk about some of these other guys, but the great thing is with some of the other guys, yes, you have a good situation, but with Grover Stewart, you have a premier defensive tackle already on your defensive line. For Kenny Moore, yes, but you have these young corners that you feel confident in, and there's a huge class of really good corners in this draft class that you feel comfortable with bringing in a couple more guys to help fill that spot. And then when you talk about Julian Blackman, you again, there's situations where there's safeties out there that you could get in free agency that could help fill that void if you felt strongly enough to do so. But yeah, when it comes to Pittman, we feel good about what Josh Downs can be. We feel like Alec Pierce has that big playability, but outside of that, you don't really feel like you have that necessary go-to wide receiver for every down pass plays. And that is where Michael Pittman comes in. Like you said, the consistency and the production that you get, it's unmatched and it needs to be addressed. And it would be much harder for Indianapolis to replace Michael Pittman than all of the rest of the guys out there that are going to be on this free agent list.
Yep, no question. I mean, from the durability standpoint, he's really been a guy that this is his first year, I guess, outside of his rookie season where he had, I believe, that leg thing happen. I mean, he has been just the model of consistency. Every single game he's out there and he's making an impact, and he's tough as nails. So, yeah, I think you bring him back for all those reasons. No question in my mind. He's so valuable. The other guys are valuable too, but I think he's just that much more valuable to what this team does offensively.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for this one, guys. That is our little breakdown of Michael Pittman and why we think he should be back with the Indianapolis Colts this next year. Let us know your thoughts. Do you think the Colts should be re-signing Michael Pittman, or do you think that you could find a different solution somewhere else? Interested to hear you guys' thoughts on that. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Let us know your thoughts. Thank you so much for all the support. And as always, guys, go Colts.